Right now, you are living through the birth and rapid evolution of a new kind of intelligence, AI.
Rival tech luminaries who have already reshaped our world are in an arms race. Recent polls suggest 70 to 90% of all CEOs plan to invest heavily in AI behind them.
The numbers are staggering, amounting to hundreds of billions of dollars in the next few years. Governments and regulators are stepping in as well, setting the stage for a global paradigm shift.
But have you stopped to understand what AI really is? Are you prepared for a world where AI will impact your job, your health, your relationships, and maybe even the nature of your humanity?
I'm Charlie Stack.
I am Lax Srinivasan. We believe your success, our success, depends on us starting to have a different set of conversations about AI.
Join us as we get to know our new neighbor. Welcome to the machine. At this point in the AI hype cycle, everyone is thinking about AI's ability to write, code, create images, translate, navigate unstructured data, sort of boring white-collar tasks and jobs that lots of people today do. But one side of the story that doesn't get much coverage is AI's ability to improve human performance and unlock human potential, a theme that if you've listened to any of our other episodes, we really like to think about. And it's not just digital tasks. Another sector that has already been subtly impacted by intelligent machines is sports. From the way athletes train, to how plays are strategized, to what sports reach you in the places where you want to watch them. The Moneyball impact in sports has evolved far beyond using spreadsheets filled with stats to drive team selection. And whether or not you're a fan, sports are a great way to think about both how AI improves human performance, but also the many impacts that AI has started to have in our physical world. Today, we're joined by Eric Redmond, founder of Nike's Technology and Innovation Office. In addition to his work with Nike, Eric continues to serve as a researcher and lecturer at MIT. He authored the book Deep Tech, Demystifying Breakthrough Technologies That Will Revolutionize Everything, which delves into the next decade of emerging technologies and their potential impact on our world. Eric, welcome to the machine.
Thank you for having me. It's a very nice studio. I appreciate this. Usually it's a cardboard box and a Zoom call, so this is...
It's not ours. They let us borrow it. Hey, so tell us first, before we dive in, how does one get lucky enough to find themselves founding Nike's Technology and Innovation Office? That sounds like a cool job.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It is a combination of, let's say, luck, obsession, and probably ADHD. I've always been obsessed with where technology is going, and my degree is in computer science, and whatever was new was very interesting to me. And I was just deeply obsessed, and that whether it was big data or whether it was Bitcoin or whether it was artificial intelligence, anytime something new, I would dig into it. But also the sort of ADHD side of it is I get bored with it very quickly and sort of move on to the next thing. And that wasn't really a career option, but I was lucky enough to find somebody that would sort of harness this.
I see that on a lot of job descriptions. Want somebody who gets bored very easily.
A superhuman ability for boredom. But really, I mean, especially like at Nike, and I wouldn't even put Nike alone on this. Any large company should have some kind of technology innovation function, just because, look, tech is moving so fast and so rapidly, like you can't afford to not understand it. That was sort of the thesis behind it. Yeah. And so having that sort of hands-on experience and knowledge of what's possible today, what's the art of the possible, where are things going, that was really the genesis of that organization.
And how did you end up in innovation? You've always been wanting to tinker with stuff. You always invent, create.
Yeah.
What's kind of the story behind that path?
Oh, I mean, so my friend used to jokingly call me the Forrest Gump of technology, which I don't know if I should like that or not. But if you remember the movie Forrest Gump, it was like there were all these sort of really important seminal moments in American history, and then there was just this guy standing in the background. That was me. And so I was like an early Bitcoin miner. I was one of the first supporters of the Oculus Rift VR headset. I had one of the very first apps on the Apple App Store. It had like 2 million downloads, and then the next one had 1 million because there were only a couple other apps out there. I was, if you remember Google Glass, I was a glass hole. I wore that thing on my face for an entire year. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's not really a path. People are asked, there's like, well, can I follow your path and get here? I was like, no, that's sort of like, you know, I won the lottery and here's the numbers I played. And if you play them, you'll win too. It's not really the kind of advice I can give. But what I can do is I think help people kind of start developing a sense of where things are going. Yeah. Because if you have a basic understanding of this technology, including AI, that's sort of the topic of the day, but even blockchain or whatever, and then an understanding of human nature and organizational structures, like you start putting all that together and it gives you a pretty good sense of like, oh, things are going this direction because people need it or they want it.
Yeah. So if we put a disclaimer on the episode today, it's you're listening to somebody who's really leaned in on this stuff sort of instinctively over time. Mm-hmm. What does leaning in at Nike looked like? What is the technology and innovation office? I mean, give us some grounding and like what that even is.
I do like that question about how do you lean in on Nike. I used to joke that it's like the company is like, it's like running on sand. Yeah. It's like, you know, every step is a new step. Yeah. And it almost doesn't matter what the steps were before. The question is like, hey, what are you doing today? What are you doing right now? And the great thing is, as an organization, anybody can try anything they want. Anybody can experiment with whatever they want.
Just do it.
Just do it. Yeah, yeah. As long as you don't forget that fundamentally what the company is, which is you know, to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world, then there's a lot of leeway to experiment.
Yeah, and in one thing, it may be a segue into AI. Thing that struck me about Nike and, you know, Eric, and AI and Nike even more striking for me because I remember Nike through, you know, Michael Jordan or you know, Tiger Woods. You take folks that are at like the GOATs, right, greatest of all times, and then Nike kind of invents things and make them even perform better, right? Yeah. And therefore everybody else benefits from those inventions. AI to me has always been, how do you take lots of data and make kind of the segment of one? How do I customize to millions of people in a way I'm talking to them as though it's segment of one? And so how does AI figure into what Nike does fundamentally in that model?
It's a new paradigm of tools, and in some ways, as a technology, I think it's even more interesting than the internet. The internet, I think, was great for sort of connecting computers together, but if you just sort of look at the history of the world, it's like, look, even in the 90s, without a lot of computers and the internet was barely a thing, like we were already becoming heavily globalized. Like, and so did the internet help supercharge that? Yes. But it didn't really fundamentally change the direction of where things were going anyway. AI is different in the sense that if you look at most of the technologies that we've created as humans, it's always been about sort of mechanical muscles, right? It's like, you know, even in the early days where you had humans and they were farming, and then they're like, oh, we're going to start using beasts of burden to do this. Like those were sort of natural muscles, but they were extending humans. And then it's like, all right, we're going to start farming with tractors now. And, you know, now we're just going to start having robotics. But all of this was just replacing human labor to be faster and more efficient.
Yeah, a more efficient way of doing the same thing.
Yeah. But now, and this is what's fundamentally different, is AI is a mechanical mind. This is something we've never seen before. And it's when you think about the fact that we've been collecting data for a long time, what we haven't had is the ability to really look at it at scale and a speed where we take the creative view that humans have. Like, let's talk about LLMs, for example. The hallucination of LLMs is not a bug, it's a feature. It's what you actually want it to do. We've always had algorithms that are precise. The problem is they're also, they have no sense of this is a good idea or a bad idea. This is just, we're going to run some numbers and here's the data. LLMs will try to make judgment calls in the way that a human might. And it's not perfect, of course, by any means. But for the first time ever, we can take this sort of scale of data we've been collecting and actually kind of put a human fingerprint and element on it. It still requires humans to judge whether the output is good. But our relationship with that data is fundamentally changing. And for me, what I think is exciting is we're really starting to paint a deeper picture of human performance, which we didn't know what the sort of frontiers of humans were capable of. And I mean, just look a couple years ago, that whole Breaking2 experiment, right? Where Eliud Kipchoge broke the 2-hour marathon barrier. There was a lot of data behind that, whether it was data behind training regimens and performance and diet, up to the actual product, that the footwear that helped get the most out of him as a runner.
Yeah, I mean, that's really fascinating for me. As I said, that AI has made a difference in the Nike model of taking the best and making them even better. Is that something that you think transport to an average enterprise? In the sense, I'm so used to, if you want to take, let's say, Salesforce productivity to go up, you wouldn't just go study the top sales guy. You would just look at all the sales data and build a model and kind of raise the average. I'm just curious, is there a paradigm that you have kind of pioneered, or Nike has before AI, but now it has just put it on steroids, that you think there may be something here in terms of how do you leverage AI to study maybe N equals one high performing kind of one, or and how do you actually make them do better, but then learn from that to make everybody else better? I mean, is there? Am I making this up, or am I reading too much into it?
But no, it's. I mean, I think there's a couple.
Well, maybe
ways.
asked differently. Like, I imagine you go through that Breaking2 thing, and there's a lot about the mechanics of how Eliud Kipchoge is running relative to everybody else. Like his heart's ability to pump oxygen, his
VO2 max,
but also
glycogen usage.
all
this stuff.
What's the flexation of his ankle, and I mean, just like every possible thing you could measure. I think you're measuring this. I think, Lax, your question is, well, now that that's all measured, how do you start to apply what you've learned about what makes him? I mean, it used to just be an Eliud Kipchoge or a LeBron James. They're just like mythical characters.
That's right.
You don't really even understand. It seems impossible. But it's sort of, it's that like bringing that to life, like understanding what it really is.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. So Kipchoge gets all the credit, and he absolutely deserves it. And he was the rock star, kind of going back to that Breaking2 experiment. But there were other runners there too. There were actually 30 pacers, and there were 2 other runners. One was the half marathon world record holder, and another was a 2 times Boston Marathon winner. And what was interesting was in using some of this data to data science to help optimize Kipchoge's training regimen, he actually didn't end up using it. And so they had an intuition and had already been doing it correctly, but the other 2 actually did change their training regimens. And so that's I think an interesting thing, because it's like, in a way, I think that we had accidentally quantified Kipchoge as a blueprint that then other athletes could then be like, oh, I've got something, I learned something from this.
So there still is something a little mythical about the Kipchogis or the LeBron
yeah.
Jameses of the world. It's, which makes sense. I mean, I don't, anybody who knows me knows I run, a marathon or two every year, sort of, sycophantically or whatever whatever that makes me. But like, so that's a sport that resonates with me, I guess, pretty deeply. Kipchoge's an interesting, case study because he is sort of a bit of a, like a philosopher athlete also, right? I mean, he lives on this mountaintop up in the thing. He has this sort of
he's a
whole
superhero.
philosophy for how he lives his life. And how much of that do you feel like are you able to sort of quantify and translate?
More than before.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, that's where I think things get interesting. Where you see this leap from sort of data science to some of this more AI driven, and this is where I was kind of getting to, where there's kind of two views of AI. There's sort of the older view, which is really this is an extension of data science, and we're going to clean up data, and we're going to use machine learning to train models, and we're going to run those models. I mean, that's cool, but honestly, it wasn't fundamentally different. It was just a way of building algorithms more efficiently than we'd ever built before. But it still required a person to sit down and say, you know what, here are the classes that I care about. Here are the categories of information I'm interested in. Now what you're able to see is you don't need those kind of constraints. There's sort of this unsupervised view of data now where you can say, hey, what are some things I didn't think of before where the machine can kind of sift through all of this unstructured data. You didn't have to tell it. It just learned a structure that's sort of latent in the data, and now give me an insight that I never saw before. And maybe what it turns out is that there is something about the way maybe he trains, or maybe the way he goes to bed or unwinds or whatever, that you would never in a million years think to look into, and now it sort of surfaces that.
I know Lax has like 8 questions here. Before you set a trap for yourself here, so I'm just going to dig in on this because I think this is an important topic for most people listening. Like data science versus AI. I mean, it sounds like you're saying for people who are trying to conceptualize like what are these things, it's sort of the leap to, in your mind, it's the leap to where the models start to have understanding that we don't understand, or how is that kind of the right way to think about it?
Yeah. I mean, not to dig like too much into how these things function, but there's a reason that transformers are the hot commodity right now. And it all comes back to a few years ago, there's that Google paper, it's all about attention.
And transformers are, large language models, Gen AI, that's the technology behind it.
All this really interesting stuff that's going on, mid-journey, image generation. It's not even just text to text.
It's all transformer tech, right?
And it all comes back to this concept of attention. And what that means in sort of a technical point of view is no longer when you give it data, let's just simplify this and say I have a bunch of text, where each of the words in the sentence is context free. Now it's very highly contextual, but it's discovered by the system itself. You don't have to
tell it the context.
You don't have to explain the context to it. For example, if I were to, let's say, put in the sentence that I'm running to the bus versus I'm running a marathon, that word running in those two sentences, even though people would agree that that's kind of the same word, the context in which you talk about it are so very different. It requires this sort of AI to sort of notice that.
I'm running an errand.
I'm running
that
an errand.
That may not even involve me running at all.
Yeah,
it could be me getting in the car.
I'm running my mouth. Yeah, 100%. That's exactly right. So the attention of the words that are coming in, and it's not even just words. It can, it could be audio, it can be images, it can be now video. That's the new thing, and that's not data science. I don't know what that is, but it is new, and
Well, that's
we're
what we
still
get.
trying
That's
to
what we
figure
get to
out.
use the word AI for, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, there is kind of a sense of intelligence behind it, but we don't even know how to define intelligence. But it's smart.
No, look, I think clearly that the underlying technology like neural nets and deep learning has been around for a while. And with large language models, I think it even surprised the researchers. At some point, it suddenly started making sense what it's outputting.
Yeah.
And so that, I think the first time they were able to scrape all the words ever written, English words on the web, I think 2 trillion words, dump it into this thing, and it kind of figures it out. So I totally agree that we are in a new era. When you have lots of words, like 2 trillion words, you can dump it in. If I could bring you back into kind of the use case that you were talking about. How do you turn kind of all of the data on the super performer, the mythical character?
Yeah.
And then how does it help everybody else in the sense, is it, as you said, is the aha there really quantifying the mythical figure in a way, not 100%, maybe 50% of how it happens, and then that's able to translate to the average population? Like, what is kind of the aha there? Like, why do this? In the sense, you said it, he didn't even use the schedule that the AI gave him.
Yeah.
So the question is, why does Nike do this with Tiger Woods, with all of these guys? May not be AI, but I'm just wondering, what is the thing behind studying the best performers and then making it, democratizing that to everybody else?
I actually took a few notes for this. I knew I would forget, but let's just focus on like athlete training. Like, there's performance analysis, there's personalized training, so you can kind of extract that what you're talking about and saying, hey, how can you apply this to other folks? There's diet plans, there's injury prevention, and an interesting aspect of the injury prevention is how that ties in, for example, with wearables. So it's like I'm wearing some sort of monitor, let's say an Apple Watch or whatever. There's a lot of AI even behind that, because at the end of the day, it's just this little thing that's sitting on your wrist. How could it possibly translate into whether your running gait is good or not? You have a video feed. How do you understand that this video, that you're targeting, that there are humans, and here's exactly how the humans are moving, and underneath that there is a skeletal structure that's moving in a certain way, and on top of that skeletal structure there are muscles that are moving in a particular way. I mean, that still requires a tremendous amount of data, and really AI is just the only game in town for analyzing that and helping you make sense of it. Again, this is all about insights at the end of the day. Simulation, how can you take for example, a live game that's going on and a couple cameras, and convert that into sort of a 3D model that is simulatable, where you could run the plays in, playing a what if scenario. What if we had played this a little differently? How do we think that outcome would happen? And then that can change and improve how you play next time. I mean, all of this is obviously through the lens of sport, but those needs can happen for any company at all, really. I mean, imagine like you've got a camera focused on a production line and you're just watching how people are moving on that line. You could take that same technology, say, hey, what if we ran a simulation of other ways that we could lay this factory out, and other ways of having people move and operate. Maybe we can find some efficiencies there.
You're gathering all the data signal from people working in the back office of an insurance underwriting operation, and you realize that they're copying and pasting the same data from the same, right? Like these things are all all sort of, you can build simulations and automate stuff so easily.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think some industries will say we are so kind of specialized in what we do, but that's the beauty of AI. It doesn't care whether it's the high-performance athlete's heartbeat data, whether it's some stock ticker
Because you don't have to teach it the context.
Yeah, back
Yeah.
to what Eric was
Yeah, yeah.
talking about, is if you're trying to let the machine figure out the kind of unknown unknowns, surface up what is in the data, then it doesn't matter. So the point is that, I'm sure Nike would have learned from how other industries are applying AI. The corollary is the way Nike is applying AI probably is transportable and parallel to other industries is kind of your point.
Yeah, I mean, let me give a little bit of example that's sort of outside of the athlete human performance side of this, and that is, at the end of the day, I mean, Nike makes and sells shoes and apparel, footwear and apparel industry. So it's really kind of part of the fashion industry. I mean, yes, it's obviously sports equipment as well, but the process is fundamentally the same as like, Gucci, for example, making loafers. Someone draws a sketch of a shoe, and then that sketch will go to someone called a pattern engineer. And so, if you're familiar with footwear at all, there's this elast. Elast is basically the negative space of a shoe. It sort of is vaguely shaped like a foot without toes. And so, what you'll do is you'll take that last and you'll take that image, and then what a pattern engineer will do is they'll put material around the last, they'll put paper, whatever it happens to be, and they try to make a version of what they see drawn in 3D. And then they'll take all those patterns off, they'll lay them down, and then in modern days, they'll then take like a CAD software and sort of outline it into this like parametric CAD drawing. And then that goes and gets fed into a stamping machine, and that stamping machine will be like, all right, well, here's a swoosh we want made out of leather, and then here's a plate of leather, and we're just gonna stamp like 100 at a time or whatever. So that's the high level of how that would work. You need that pattern made so that you can manufacture, but way before you get to that, it's a sample, right? So imagine you're a footwear designer, you draw out, you get a really cool idea. You now send that off to a pattern engineer. It could take hours, days, weeks to get a sample back. And then what's gonna happen? Almost certainly you're gonna look at it and be like, that's not exactly what I meant. You make some notes, you send it back to them, and
Nice
then they
try,
try
buddy.
again. Yeah. And this is a cycle. This will go on a few times. And so one of the things that we worked on, which I don't mind talking about because there's a patent out there for it, so it's already public, where you can use AI reinforcement learning, which is sort of the same technology behind self-driving cars, to do that pattern engineering in an automated way. People had tried algorithmically to do it. It's just way too much art to it, way too much of a complex space. But it turns out that in the same way of self-driving cars, people believed, you couldn't possibly, it's too complicated to drive a car. But AI has shown you can to an extent, as long as the weather's nice.
And nobody's crossing the road.
And that same kind of concept behind this pattern engineering thing. Okay, great. But the point isn't to automate somebody's job. That is not the goal. The goal is to get immediate feedback. So if you're a designer, now you don't have to wait months with this iterative long loop. Now it's like, here's a sketch, build me a digital pattern. Nah, not quite what I meant. Make this change. And you could even type through like an LLM and be like, hey, just conversationally, in the same way you would send an email to a pattern engineer. It's like, that's not quite what I meant. Why don't you try this change?
I want this panel to look different or have a different arc on it.
Yeah, 100%. And so once you've got that, now you've sort of collapsed this process from months into a few hours. Now think about how that starts changing just the value chain in general, because on average, I mean, for a footwear industry, it can take 18 months from like a concept all the way to the point where you're sort of mass producing a product that's in consumers' hands. Now think about the fact of the seasonality of making footwear. Like you have an idea for something in holiday, it's going to be 2 years before you can actually deliver that to market. But if you get it into, say, 11 months, now it's only 1 year.
Yeah.
For example.
So so it looks like you've kind of, in terms of use cases, you're saying what you're learning in one area, it's getting applied in kind of product design, or is it R&D, or like where in the scheme of things, the use case that you just talked about fits in? is it in manufacturing? Is it in
Right.
design?
Development. Yeah.
Development.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. That's kind of fascinating because it's kind of where this is another thing in an average enterprise. AI gets stuck in pockets, right? And data gets stuck in pockets, and it's really good to hear kind of like. Is how do you take what you learned, the insights from one, and be able to use it across enterprise in other areas? How prevalent is that in kind of how does that work? I mean, in Nike or other places that you have seen.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the example I gave you was there are two reasons I picked that example. One, because it's already public and I can talk about it. But two, is I think it shows how it's the application changes the process, and that process kind of lets people rethink of how you go about delivering value. And that's what I think is really, really interesting here. It's not about, again, it's not about like, hey, I just automated this one task. It's about we fundamentally rethought how we did this. I mean, I think about it in the same terms as like, and I think you're going to see this a lot. Back in the sort of Industrial Revolution age, right? The original Industrial Revolution, everything was steam powered. And so the way they had to build out a factory was they had this sort of boiler in the middle of the factory, and there would be steam power, and it would turn these cranks, and all the machines had to be in a circle around it because that was just how you had to structure it, because that was the power source. Then what happened, the electrification, they actually started putting, engines at the particular stations. And then they were plugged in. So, but interestingly enough, they never actually changed the structure of the factory. They kind of kept it in this circular format because it was what they were used to.
Yeah.
What really caused the second industrial revolution was this realization, we can move these machines around to actually be a more efficient flow.
Assembly
we can
line.
rethink into an assembly line how we actually manufacture. And that was the big aha moment. And I think that's what you're going to see with AI too, is like originally the first thing people are going to do is they're going to start automating these individual tasks. A decade from now, people are going to be like, oh, wow, like our whole process can change.
Yeah. And Eric, another question is, as part of kind of innovation, when you get these insights, it's all about insights, AI-generated insights. So what is the process you follow to leverage the insight? Is there a set of problems the business provides you, and then you look for what do we have, and then towards that, or is it I have an insight, how do I monetize that insight internally? What is the paradigm that you use?
That is a fascinating question and would probably take an entire other podcast
on our next episode
to go over. But at the highest level, I mean, you are right that there's not one paradigm. There's like a series of paradigms, and this is where it comes back to, what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve? Fundamentally, why are you here? How do you deliver value to your customers? Where do you show up in the marketplace? Like these are all, I think, part of the valid questions. It's not just about, is this possible? It's, is this possible? Is this valuable? Do we see, I used to have this joke with my team. I said, if you can't imagine a world where there's $1 billion in value, then either expand your vision or stop doing it. Not that you're necessarily going to reach it, but you do have to have some sort of criteria on deciding what you go forward with.
And this is such a great thing to lean in on, because what you're raising, which I think is true, is most of the world right now is like focused on, there's this percentage of what I do that can get automated, and I'm not going to have anything to do anymore.
That is true.
But the mentality of, well, actually, there's so much undiscovered value in the world, like things we want, things that would be useful. We live in a very imperfect world, right? So it's not hard, if you really frame your mind correctly, to think about how things could be better and what that might look like. And I think to your point, in the early innings, you could choose to look at this and say, well, there used to be this engineer who, or whole teams of engineers who were doing this job, that, if we're really being honest, wasn't being done very well. It was kind of inefficient. It was the old boiler room in a circle model of like, well, I send you a design, it comes back a week later, or I send it back to you. The reality is, if your goal is to produce the best shoe, right, like the greatest running shoe ever made, that process is never going to get you there, right? And the process you talked about, where I can quickly iterate as a designer, allows me to sort of rearrange that boiler room and think about like, well, how do I actually get to a better shoe? And then, so, the question becomes, what's the potential in the future? I mean, I notice this trend of, in every industry, whether it's like personalized medicine or whatever, hyper personalization. One of the things that's fascinating about running is you learn, there was this big thing, right? Kipchoge breaks 2. I remember I ran the Chicago Marathon right after that happened, and the entire race course, 60,000 people, was a sea of these bright green Breaking2 Kipchoge shoes.
Vaporfly 4%.
The Vaporfly 4%.
Yeah.
And this shoe like changed the game for marathon running, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But afterwards, it turned out that for specific style of runners, mostly faster runners, this shoe produces a 4% energy return. But for a lot of slower runners, and even some faster runners, because of the mechanics of their running, it actually was maybe doing harm to their running, because they weren't running like Kipchoge was when you designed the shoe for him, the world's most elite runner, right? And so, you picture a future world where now all of a sudden I can iterate these design cycles down. Well, what jobs do people do? I mean, maybe there's a Lax shoe and a Charlie shoe and an Eric shoe, because Nike can get so hyper personalized about maximizing your performance or your performance. Like, it's just, I love that mentality of like, imagine the value you can create, because there's just so much unexplored territory. We don't tend to think about that.
Well, and I mean, we can even think even bigger, and think about the supply chain, right? This is where I think things start getting interesting. Is there's AI, but there are a lot of other interesting technologies right now as well. I mean, spatial computing. I'm going to say blockchain, but TBD on that. But 3D printing, additive manufacturing is becoming much more prevalent as well. I mean, from a certain point of view, Flyknit is additive manufacturing, in the sense that like waste is very low, because rather than sort of taking a square of material and cutting it, instead you weave it in pretty much the shape you need. I mean, you have to trim it and stuff, but it's pretty much it. Now, that's sort of step one. And also a lot of companies, and Nike's not the only one that's done this, have experimented with 3D printed midsoles. And so you start putting that together, and increasingly sort of really low waste, really low carbon footprint manufacturing is just good for everybody. Now, let's take it a step further, because now if we're getting into a world where I can largely automate that manufacturing, well, I could do that anywhere. And so I could onshore manufacturing. Like there could be one in New York, where if you want to order a shoe, you scan your foot, and then you get a custom shoe made for you, along with not just scanning your foot, but like your entire sort of profile, that sort of AI generated, just sort of, let's say you've got your Apple Watch and it just tracks. We know a lot about you. You run. We know how your gait works. We know it's going to be really good for you. Maybe you've got some AI-based coaching that's been helping you. And it's like, oh, by the way, for your particular stage and your age and everything else about you, we're going to make these just for you. And they're being made down the street, and they're going to be delivered to you in an hour. I mean, this, I think, is where things get really interesting.
Maybe the last shoe you bought from us has 30 sensors in it. And we know specifically how that shoe's wearing. And
yeah, I mean, that's a whole another a whole another ball game. I think maybe another episode.
I'm still waiting. I'm still waiting to get a pair of those LA gears that light up when you walk. So I'm not quite there yet.
Yeah. So just in the kind of few minutes that we have, it looks like so far the takeaways for me are. It's really that unknown, using AI to surface up the unknown, right? It so happens Nike's model of pointing at the mythical best performers, but it could be done in any other industry. Second, I heard you, Eric, talk about kind of digitizing the process or reimagining the process. Using the insights that coming out of the unknown unknowns. And so you're not solution chasing problem. You actually have some, kind of a overarching business kind of objective. The third things you're talking about is, how can you kind of leverage other technologies? You're absolutely right. AI is not the only technology. And how could you kind of reimagine even kind of writ large the entire kind of the supply chain all the way to the customer in a way that back to your if it's not $1 billion idea, go back and rethink.
Yeah.
Is anything else you would add to kind of takeaways?
Yeah, I mean, I like how you kind of summed that up. I have a friend, he's an investor, and he says that amateurs think in percentages, professionals think in multiples. And I always like that because that's kind of the way, I mean, look, and you brought this up as well. It's like, this is so early stage and there's so much value out there. It requires that sort of bigger multiple thinking. Like, stop thinking about like, oh, we're going to save 10% with AI. Like, who cares?
Yeah.
Like, you could probably have saved 10% by other means that don't require the application of a new technology. And so that's, I think, the way people need to be thinking and experimenting, because the fact is it does require experimentation. Like, until you try it, you just don't know. And so that's become my obsession lately. It's not really so much about the technology. It's about how do you take an organization and lead them through this way of thinking in an innovative way that's actually practical and delivers results and value based off of just playbooks that work. And number one is stop thinking small. Like, that's step number one.
That's really fascinating. I think it's great advice. So it's anything else you would add to that? In the sense, what's coming to me near and dear to Charlie is also, where would you put leadership of organizations in that equation you just talked about? I mean, you're talking about experimentation mindset.
Can
it go bottom up or does it have to come top down?
Both, but I think the bottom up tends to often take care of itself if you kind of give them a little leeway and you have a culture of innovation and experimentation. I think where things start breaking down is meeting in the middle from the top down to the bottom up, because and especially in eras like this, I mean, we're sort of in this like weird, I call it the post-ZERP hangover, where, we just had like a decade of easy money and nobody could fail, to this realization of, maybe we don't have free money. We have to make some very specific strategic decisions. And with that, I think the reaction is almost like a nervousness, like from all levels, like top down. It's like, oh, well, let's hedgehog down into the things we know really well. And then bottom up is like, well, I'm really afraid to experiment because I want to protect my job because there's layoffs happening on a daily basis. The real advice is, unfortunately, you just got to get over that, because you have to experiment. I mean, tech, AI, and all the others are coming so fast. It's not going to slow down. If you aren't actively experimenting and comfortable with placing, as sort of Annie Duke says, if you're not thinking in bets, then you might not be long for this world, because in 10 years, like your competitors are not standing still. And so it's sort of like riding a wave. Like if you, at the very least, you've got to be riding the wave, which means moving forward. But if you're standing still, you're just going to get washed
Well,
over.
I think those are closing words that all three of us can certainly agree on. Eric, thank you so much for all the time here today. This has been a really awesome conversation.
Yeah,
Appreciate
great to
Absolute
talk.
pleasure. Thank you guys for
Yeah,
having
this is
me.
fantastic.
time.
Thank you, Eric.
All right.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Welcome to the Machine.
To join the conversation, visit us on welcometothemachine-ai.com.
Special thanks to Spencer Stewart, the Return on AI Institute, and our fantastic production team, Trey, Jojo, and John, for helping bring WTTM to life.
Don't forget to share, like, and subscribe.
See you next time.